This meeting is being recorded.
Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. And we're very honored today to have a special guest, somebody who needs no introduction to Gagglers. In fact, there's been a vociferous demand among Gagglers that we want Matt Ehret. So we finally delivered Matt Ehret, and I hope everyone will be happy. Matt Ehret is a blogger, an author. He's a regular commentator on international affairs. And obviously, there's a great deal to discuss. One thing we could start off with is obviously the big news of last week was the Seymour Hersh story and his essentially confirmation of what we had suspected all along, was that the author of the explosion on the Nord Stream gas pipelines was the United States. Well, what's interesting about this, I mean, there are two interesting things about it. First of all, that this act of terrorism, for that's exactly what it is, was really perpetrated against an ally. The United States did this against an ally. It didn't do it against an adversary. It didn't do it against Russia. It did it against Germany, its closest ally in Europe. The second thing is the United States is now putting down a marker and saying, this is how we are going to deal with economic challenges around the world. You know, yeah, you think you're going to get around our naval dominance. You know, we can close off the various choke points in the world, you know, so that we can, that was used to be our dominance, and you're going to get around it by building pipelines, you know, underwater and undersea. No, you're not going to do it. We are going to sabotage any attempt to get outside of the American power stream. So anyway, I thought that might be an opportunity to kick off. So what's your take?
Yeah, well, what a shit show. I mean, it's really late stage empire cannibalizing itself entirely. And I mean, just the very fact that this was something which these figures like Victoria Nuland and Blinken and others were relishing so openly. And even before it happened, you had such remarks from Nuland and Biden himself asserting that this would never happen. It's really just this egotism, this hubris of over self-confidence, which gives me, and I think many of the intelligentsia of the Eurasian partnership, as well as the saner people around the world, a little bit of a sense of hope that ultimately behind this military power, the levels and layers and nests of conspiracy, which seem all very intimidating and sophisticated, there is this deep drunkenness, this tendency to just drink your own opium, right, or smoke your own opium, to do your own drugs, which you originally catered for victimizing your masses. They're doing it themselves, and they're selected managers of the system that they need to navigate through the storm are themselves nuts. And Seymour Hersh, I was a little bit worried because he didn't do anything for a few years, and I was like, damn, did he retire? Did he go off the grid? What happened? And then to come out the way he did, with this bombshell of a report, which is causing such reverberations, it is fantastic. I mean, this guy has sources, contacts out of the wazoo, and he just put it together in such a beautiful, horrifyingly beautiful fashion. That yes, indisputably, the U.S. managed it. He goes through exactly how it was done, how the detonators that were set up 3 months in advance were put there, how the how the mines were put there on the pipeline, how the detonators were
but Matt, you know, he just made it all up, Matt. Okay, he out of whole cloth, he made it all up. Okay, because that's the reaction to it. I mean, I think Craig Murray has an article right now at consortiumnews.com and really talks about how the perfection of the big lie. And you're absolutely right when you drink your own Kool-Aid here. Matt, and George, one of the things I took from this whole story, of course, none of us had any doubts who was behind it. I mean, okay, the details, oh, okay, the Norwegians played a role. Okay, we knew, you know, that added a layer right there. But kind of to George's point, this hubris is that you talk publicly about what you're going to do, knowing the consequences of it, and having such contempt for your wonderful, wonderful allies. We're doing it all for you after all. Okay, we're again crossing the pond to save you people from yourselves. And Victoria Nuland in her public pronouncement, it's so base. It's really quite extraordinary, and it is end of empire panic. Because as George pointed out, I thought it was rules-based order replacing the UN Charter. Okay, no, it's called barbarism. That's what it is. Okay, and as George and I reflected upon, even before the Hersh report, is that now civilian infrastructure is on the table. Okay, so I fully expect that on Russia's own timetable, in place of its choosing, it will do something of its own. Okay, because what they've done is they've opened the gates to hell where anything is allowed. And the vulnerability, look, the American public and political class went bonkers over a balloon. Okay, how do you think they're going to react to something that is actually meaningful?
Good point. Yeah, very good point. No, I mean they're in such a state of hectic franticness, and I mean, you could see the signs. The cracks are all over the place, right? Where they're all based on perception. This is an empire of perception, not reality. So that again, it demoralizes and intimidates certain people who are opening up or beginning to try to figure out how do you think about living under empire for the first time. This is obviously a big learning curve the last couple of years for a lot of people around the West. And at first it is intimidating, but I mean, when you look at it, they're so inconsistent with themselves. The point that you even have finance ministers of Europe all arguing over whether they should even start utilizing the Russian assets that they confiscated, they froze and essentially stole. They want to actually use, which, now you're having weird debates like, is this against international law? I think it is, but should we not do it by the way, where is it?
But apparently, according to a Bloomberg story, they're not even sure where these assets are. So they say, yeah, we've got $500 billion of Russian assets, but they said we can only account for about 60 billion. We don't know where the hell the other assets are. Well, that's an interesting one. I hadn't even thought of that. Yeah, well, we've got it, but where are they?
Add to that, George, is that you have these Russian billionaires, which, much to my chagrin, taking the money out of Russia and putting it into the West, which of course the West is more than happy to clean their money because they take a profit from it. But Matt and George, how many yachts? I don't know the number off the top of my head, but they're actually servicing yachts in the Mediterranean because they've taken it away from their owners and they're just sitting in harbor and they're paying maintenance fees on it, millions and millions of dollars. Okay, so I would actually say this whole asset grab is a net loss for them so far. Okay, and then you have Peter Avin, which of course I knew him when I worked at Alpha Bank. He has, I think, Lithuanian citizenship because of his ancestors, and now his assets now are on the line. And he legally has a citizenship in a Baltic state, but they're using that to go after his assets. Why? Because he was a banker in Russia. Okay, I mean, it doesn't make any sense on this side of the border, but it shows the mindlessness of it all. And Matt, is something that I've talked at great length on my program, is that the world is watching all of this. So why would anybody in the emerging world want to get near these people? They're just going to steal your assets. Okay, the impact of that is so profound. Saudi Arabia wanting to get into BRICS, for example. Okay, they see, and George and I are no boosters for Saudi Arabia, but they realize that when you get in bed with these people, it's treachery.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, just the lack of insight, Like they need allies at this point. They need to. Africa is the future at this point. Like you're going to have the dominant consumer market coming out by 2060 of Africa. Like something like 60% of Africans are under the age of 28 years old. I mean, this is the dominant. They're hungry for growth, for technological development that it's been withheld from the whole continent for generations now by a system of enduring empire. And they desperately want a better way. They look at what China did in 30 years, compressing 300 years of Western experience of industrialization. China did in 30 years, and China, unlike the West, is providing the means for them to do it as well. It's happening at a slower pace, obviously. There's a lot more complexity and infiltration and fifth columnists and governments just wholly, managed by Western corporations in Africa. But despite that, you have this giant hunger and thirst for a future. And with all of the offers for stability, for stabilization, for infrastructure, you have a military exercise that's going to be done with South Africa, China, and Russia this week. Despite that, Blinken and the Western, managers are still so delusional that they have these absurd festivities like the U.S. Africa Congress in December 2022, which was just an imperialist wet dream trying to intimidate these countries to signing over their what little sovereignty they have to corporations to basically steal more of their minerals for solar panel and Green New Deals. And I mean, they're playing, some of the governments are playing along and giving lip service, but obviously their hearts and minds and policies are going east, all of them. I mean, there's I don't know, there's something like 13 different governments that have signed up to varying degrees with African governments with contracts to develop nuclear power with Russia. A couple are very, very advanced, South Africa, Egypt, Algeria, but I mean, even sub-Saharan, there's a lot, which is, I mean, something that scares the hell out of a lot of Western geopoliticians, because these countries Black Africa was never supposed to have nuclear power. That was only for South Africa. That's why South Africa is the only country of Africa with nuclear, because they were run by white racists for a long time. And now all of a sudden, the dark-skinned people want to access and understand the atom and use it for their benefit. And Russia and China are helping.
Yeah, but Matt, this is where it gets interesting. I mean, how does the US respond to this? And one way that they could respond is how they responded to Nord Stream. They saw Nord Stream as a serious problem. Ever since they built Nord Stream 1, Americans saw this as a problem. And the moment they started building Nord Stream 2, the Americans focused on it, laser-like. This wasn't something, it didn't start under Trump, it started long before Trump. They really, really hated this idea of this energy connection between Germany and Russia. And the American response was that, how are we going to stop this? We're not going to stop it by sanctions. We're just going to physically stop it. We're just going to blow it up. So this is how they're going to be dealing. I mean, we know we have all these Russia-Iran trade deals, this north-south corridor. I think Americans are going to try, just physically, they're going to try and destroy it. Any pipelines, pipelines between Russia and China, they're just going to physically try to destroy it, just simply sabotage it, just as they did with Nord Stream. So I think
George, but that begs the question is that, we're in uncharted waters right now, the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline. And as I said, there is going to be a reaction. So, I mean, I know the learning curve of the people in Washington is really flat, but, American infrastructure is very vulnerable, extremely vulnerable.
Well, I think, yeah, no, I agree.
In all these cases of, what do they call it? When they attack your security system, there's a certain word for it.
Asymmetric warfare, cyber.
Yeah, well, it's a form of blackmail, but it's a kind of a spin-off.
Ransomware.
Ransomware. There you go. Ransomware. I mean, they're going to learn the hard way, and so that's the very basis of deterrence. I mean, we usually think of deterrence when it comes to the nuclear triad, but maybe that's going to have to be expanded out, because the cables under the Atlantic Ocean and things like that, I mean, are extremely vulnerable. The Atlantic is a big place, okay? And the Russians do have the technology here. Again, the Russians show enormous amounts of patience. And, they always have this caricature of Khrushchev with a shoe, but it is not, that is not the case right now. And so, but George does bring up a good point. The world is going to have to be very, very worried that if they get out of line, that, it's not going to be just the banking system and sanctions, it's going to be your territorial integrity.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think as you just pointed out, that Russia, the patience expressed by not only Russia, I mean, Iran, China, so many of these countries, the patience is superhuman. And I mean, I think it begets a very deep insight on the part of the geopolitical planners, the intelligentsia of these countries, who have come to recognize an important point of principle, which is that the empire much like the Roman Empire earlier, except the Roman Empire was not sitting on as much, the higher they are, the harder they fall. There wasn't as much technological advancement, as much, economic integration, technological integration back 2,000 years ago. But despite that, it collapsed under the weight of its own immorality, its own spreading itself too thin. So part of it is that we have a condensed form of the collapse of the Roman Empire temporally, and they know psychologically what we talked about already just now, is that the system is going to collapse under its own contradictions that have built up. It's like a bad mathematical equation. When you fudge the data early on when you're balancing the equation, if you don't correct that fudge early on, that'll get really big and loud the more layers of fudging you try to do, and then it's just a mess. Any mathematician knows you don't skip those steps.
That's an interesting point, because I look at things like the growing levels of debt in the West, which are really quite horrific, and like the Roman Empire, I don't think the element of technology really is all that germane. I think value system, no longer believing in the ideology of empire. I think countries like China and Russia, even India, South Africa, they're waiting for the U.S. for its own collapse. No one is going to attack the United States. The United States has no real peer threat against it right now, but it is imploding on its own. It's attacking its own citizens. Alistair Crook a couple of days ago had a very interesting article about that, about how a divided America will play into the end of empire. And so I think it's I don't like to use Marxist language too much, but the internal contradictions are coming into play. But that's what makes the U.S. a very dangerous country. Because Nord Stream 2, it's just going to start acting in a most erratic way. John Mearsheimer, in a recent debate, I think he was in Sweden or something like that, and I was really surprised, and the audience was too. He said, "Look, the United States is Godzilla on the world stage, okay? And nobody wants to fight Godzilla, but maybe collectively they can start, coming together and start taming this out of control power, because the fact that the global majority, as I call it, are not on board for this at all, and the contradictions inside of Europe that are growing too, makes this a very, very dangerous time, because it has been billed as the Second World War, Zelensky as Churchill. I mean, the rhetorical propaganda that is being spewed out right now is making it existential for them.
Oh yeah. Well, this is we are in a situation where there is a matter of just allowing your enemy to fumble. Like the nature of the enemy, I shouldn't call it the enemy, because I ultimately live in the West and I want the West to rehabilitate and go back to its better traditions that it once had. But all that to say, the West is really it's flailing. It's a flailing beast right now. There's a lot of panic, and I think that the Eurasian powers, a lot of the weaker states, as you pointed out, who are all vectoring east across the Southwest Asia and others, have come to recognize that this system is not long for the world. The financial system that the West is sitting on, the Wall Street City of London banking cartel, is a giant bubble waiting to blow. It is blowing. The supply chains are melting down, are being ripped to shreds. Part of it by design, and I think they're kind of aware that there is this sort of intentional self-sabotage, because originally, you got to keep in mind, the 1992 script for the New World Order that was being championed by Kissinger and Bush Sr. and Biden, how I learned to love the New World Order, right? This was all premised on the idea that the game was over. History was done. End of history is now, and now it's just pulling together the pieces. That's the script worked. We're here. We're at the end of the line. And now all of a sudden, for the past decade, especially, I mean, a little longer, but I mean, really the last decade, it's been dramatic. The script no longer functions when applied to reality. Reality doesn't behave, but they're still holding on to that same damn script. And so part of that involved, getting over nation states, consolidating a one world League of Nations type of technocratic government onto the world as the new type of governing class would impose their will from a Nietzschean standpoint onto the many so-called regional powers of the world, who wouldn't really have a say in anything very important. They could control local things. They'd be granted local influence here and there with local managers, but ultimately they wouldn't have a say over anything while the system was shut down under this new feudalist sort of model of organizing society around human talking cows and masters, untouchable immortals in their high castles in Davos and other orgy infested zones of hedonism. That didn't work. That's not working anymore, so they're still operating on that script that they can't let go of. And all of these other countries are saying, China's saying, no, we don't want to sacrifice our people. Russia's saying, we don't want to sacrifice our traditions or people on this altar. We're going to do something else, actually. And we're inviting you to join us too. If there's anybody sane on that side of the wall, come and join us. And some people heard it, and they're real at Saudi Arabia and UAE and Turkey and many countries who have behaved very badly are all saying, well, yeah, maybe that other side of maybe that's actually a little bit more in conformity with what we want, despite our proclivities to playing a very nefarious game.
But I think that's very interesting because you think, why didn't it work? Fukuyama writes his book, The End of History, which means, hey, the West has won the ideological wars, you defeated fascism, defeated communism, that's it, we're going to dominate. And although, Fukuyama would say, yeah, well, it'll be China, that's a potentially big economic power, they essentially thought China would follow the trajectory of Japan, and just simply accept American, subordination to the United States. They thought the kind of Yeltsin Russia, Russia would always be under some Yeltsin-like figure, would also accept rule by the United States. So essentially, neither Russia nor China played along with that script. So now, as you say, they have a problem. And I think that's kind of why they decided to make a stand in Ukraine. This is where you have to stop this. Otherwise, this is really going to spin out of control.
Just on just the tail end of that, I think George is onto something here, because the framing of the conflict in Ukraine, and it also touches on something that Matt said, is that they think this is kind of the cure-all and the correction for all of the flailing, because the last 30 years have been a catastrophe. I mean, absolute catastrophe, particularly for the people they represent, for the middle class and working people. And they turn this into the silver bullet for the reasons both of you just mentioned here. And again, that's why I think it's really dangerous, because it's not going to work.
Yeah, no. No, I know. I mean, it's it does seem like they put all of their eggs in this damn Ukraine basket. Right? Like I thought at first that they maybe had, I mean, obviously they're not ignoring other parts of the great game. There's obviously, like Lavrov said, Moldova. That's another component of what the calculus is thinking about. But what is Moldova? I mean, compared to Ukraine, that's like the biggest bombshell that they had planted under Russia's underbelly was Ukraine. Moldova it can be problematic, as can Kosovo, which they're obviously like stirring the pot in various places to create disequilibrium. But I mean, they really put their eggs in the Ukraine basket. That's the real bomb that they've been
Kosovo and
decades ago.
Sorry, but Kosovo and Moldova are they're part of the same problem. I mean, it's just opening up another front against Russia. I mean, if things go bad in Moldova, Russia will have to do something. I mean, they can't just allow that enclave just to be overrun by NATO. So, that's going to be a problem. I mean, if this spins out according to the U.S. NATO script, Kosovo, that's they can't do much about that. And the loss of Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, that would be a problem for Russia. But it's part of the same game, which is let's create problems for Russia. It's another front for Russia.
But that's so interesting, George. And I mean, again, the way it's described to Western publics, that Transnistria, Moldova, okay, obviously Kosovo, there's very little that can be done. But these are points for advantage that you push. You don't solve these problems. See, if you went for the approach of why don't we just solve this? Okay, I mean, who are the stakeholders? What do everybody want? How can we make this work for? But no, it's just the opposite. It's almost like, oh, let's pull out the Transnistria card right now. It's time to play it. Okay, Moldova got one in my back pocket. We'll play it when we need it. See, this is this kind of mantic desire to cause trouble. I always have said this when it was going with all the stuff that was going on in Syria. I look at it as like a roulette wheel. They keep spinning the wheel, throwing the ball on, waiting for their lucky number. Didn't get it, we'll do it again. And we'll until it all lines up. Meanwhile, the people on the ground suffer, people go into debt, okay? People's lives are destroyed, puppets are captured. All the while, they keep spinning the roulette wheel for a win.
Oh, that's a great way to put it. Yeah, no, and it really is just a game of destruction. You're totally right. They don't care about collateral damage at all, and just the fact that all of their so-called allies, and there's a statement, right, that I think it was Lord Palmerston who said the empire doesn't have permanent friends, we just have permanent interests, and that's really the same thing we see applied today. Is that all of the people who have been petted since World War II and petted and told that they're the treasured ally of the Anglo-American special relationshipers. No, everybody's a sacrificial lamb on this game, and whether it's Japan, whether it's, I mean, Japan's being flushed. There's a direct war against the Japanese people over the viability of Japan as an industrial civilization. We could see it for the past, especially 25 years. Really under Reagan, it began sabotaging Japan's microchip industry by U.S. competitors who undercut and undermined Japan's once dominant microchip industry. That was intentionally, undermined. Princes of Yen, another great documentary by Richard Werner. My wife wrote about this, but I mean, there was a conscious desire to impose shock therapy and restructure the Japanese economy to make them more economically dependent upon the West. Same thing for South Korea, another occupied military industrial state. The Korean War never ended in that sense. Just like Japan, just like Germany, 40,000 troops still occupying Germany, and they'll be used on the chessboard, but ultimately flushed at the most expedient moment, like we see in Ukraine. Like, you think that what they're doing to Ukraine, 300,000 plus young people, young men of Ukraine dead unnecessarily over a war that could have been stopped at any moment, just by having a dialogue, which is now illegal in Ukraine. To even just talk to Russian counterparts is illegal. No, I mean, they're willing to do this to the French, to the Germans, to anybody. They don't care. They're willing to do it to Americans. They're willing to do it to British people too. They don't, because they're not nation state. It's not any nation in the position of deciding anything. That's a fiction we've been given by the mainstream media.
Oh, yeah, and if you try it, like Hungary, there's punishment. Okay, if Urban says, oh, that's not, it's not our fight here. Look what they do to him. I mean, George is obviously much more close to it than we are, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's a colored revolution in play.
Samantha Powers, right, is there right now on the ground.
That's right. She was over the weekend meeting brilliant, talented young Hungarians. And you see these fresh-faced Hungarians sitting at a table with Samantha Power. That's the new elite that's being groomed by the United States. But I guess, going back to this point, I mean, the Americans really, they are afraid, as for all the reasons that we discussed, the kind of rearrangement of the geopolitical chessboard. They want to go back to the world in 1992. That's why they're making a stand in Ukraine. I mean, they're going to basically just keep doing this. I mean, they are determined to knock out Russia. Russia is the one they want to get, because if I think they think, if we can knock out Russia, we're going to be able to deal with China. China without Russia is an easy mark. They don't have the sophistication of Russia. They're more economically dependent on the rest of the world than Russia is. If we can knock out Russia, we can basically deal with China and treat China the way we dealt with Japan after 1945. I mean, that's, I think, the thinking in Washington, which is why they've decided to target Russia first rather than China.
But unfortunately, it's not working. Okay, that's why I find it very interesting, Matt. I'm sure you followed it as well, as they have these Ukraine contact groups, reconstruction, and who's going to invest money in Ukraine and its new industry, and they sit around with a straight face around a table and they're talking about it. I was just thinking, what Ukraine are you talking about? What Ukraine in your mind? What are the borders of that Ukraine? What is the population of that country? Okay, I mean, it's almost it's surreal. It's Kafkaesque. They're planning the next 25 years of Ukraine, and I just, what are these? But that it falls in line with this messianic view that we've been talking about. It's inconceivable in their minds that they will not achieve their goals. and damn reality. That's what makes this very dangerous.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's really, they see these countries like Ukraine, as and Russia as a whole. They see Russia, they see all Slavic people as from a very racist lens. They see all of these zones as just being slave colonies, just like what the design for the original New World Order of the 1920s, 30s, especially, led by Nazi fascist, enforcers, which were still being bankrolled by the same City of London, Bank of International Settlements, Wall Street industrialist factions of Western fascists, who we obviously, history books don't tell it that way, but that's how it was. That's how they saw Russia. That's what they loved in Trotsky, because that's why they worked so hard to get the Trotskyists to go back into a dominant position, so that they could go back to the 1920s perestroika under Armand Hammer, which is just basically new economy policy, liberalize, bring in the Western oligarchs, buy up the land, and ultimately just service the minerals, the food, everything needed to just satisfy the capital, some of the core zones. And people like, immoral sociopaths like Trotsky, his little handlers, were super happy going along with that design. And that's why George Bush Sr. called it Operation Hammer. It was in honor of Armand Hammer in 1991. It's the same logic that was being applied to the George Soros perestroika age, and that's what they want to go back to. They just love that. They hate the fact that was.
That's premised on the fact that they would have pliant servants for them. Okay, and that's why they looked upon the Yeltsin years so glowingly, because he was duped and he was willing to go along with what they wanted. And so, but again, as George and I have talked about endlessly, is that at least in this epoch, it's the Soviet Union / Russia lost the Cold War. You lost, and that's why we, the victors, have a right to enforce our will upon you. And there's also a cultural element of it. Russia's a very conservative country, something that they can't comprehend. There's something wrong with conservative people. Again, going to domestic politics also.
Yeah.
My whole point is it's a very toxic brew that has all come together.
Oh yeah.
But it's interesting also that the Trotsky thing is because, it's no accident, as they say, that the Trotskyists became allies of the U.S. Cold War effort. I mean, the CIA was very shrewdly bankrolled the Trotskyists as the most effective tool domestically against the Soviet Union, against the influence of communism and influence of Soviet power. So the Trotskyists were really always at the forefront of the Cold War effort. And Trotsky himself had a baneful influence on American intellectual life. I mean, via all the James Burnhams and Dwight McDonald's and so on.
Albert Bolsetter and Irving Kristol,
exactly.
And what's his name? The Dewey, John Dewey is
John
sort
Dewey,
of like one of his
Sidney Hook,
subtle protector, handler. I mean, Dewey plays an important role. I'm trying to figure out the full picture of this, but you have this whole network, and James Burnham is key in all of this, his personal assistant throughout the 30s, who then becomes the godfather of the neocons and Cold Warrior. And it's not inconsistent when you look at like Trotsky's philosophy of permanent war, permanent revolution, burn the earth in order to get some mystical bifurcation point in the future, at which point somehow a big transformation is going to happen. That's embedded in the neocon view of burning the earth in order for them. It became the Protestant, it became an absorption basket for a lot of the Protestant right-wing nutters who were big into the rapture, who believed that it was their duty to bring in
messianic. I already said the word messianic. Okay, this is where it all comes together. It's messianic.
Yeah, it's crusader. I mean, it's very much in conformity with the revival of the crusader spirit of unifying everybody around a holy mission, which ultimately it's designed. The Crusades were designed originally in the 11th century to be just that, a force of divide to conquer, chaos and destruction that one could manage from the top, the disorder, in order to block the types of development and cooperation that were happening in the 8th, 9th, 10th century between China, the Abbasid dynasty, the Carolingian Empire, even frankly, when you look at even the interesting, I mean, this is a very there's a lot of opinion about Khazaria, but I mean, there really was this Jewish kingdom in the north that was part of the Steppe Silk Road between the Tang Dynasty and Charlemagne's empire, which also had a branch throughout the south. So you had all of these corridors that were run by the Jewish Radhanite traders and managed in a positive way to maintain a harmony of cultures, was antithetical to the Samuel P. Huntington logic or the ultramontanist papacy's logic of that no, every culture must be subdued under this particular variation of Catholicism, of whatever the hell that was, more Satanism masquerading, that they wanted to, and that's where the Crusaders got their pathways, was by taking over the transit routes of the first, or the revival of the Silk Road. That's where all the crusade for the first, second, third, fourth crusade all moved along these trade routes. So it was like an early Samuel P. Huntington Clash of Civilizations logic to, again, just destroy this ecumenical alliance, which today is manifesting in the form of the new Silk Road and the spirit of inter-civilizational forces reviving this idea of win-win cooperation. There's something that we have to work with that makes us all human first, and our ethnicity or religious groups secondary, but we're humans first against empire. That's, I mean, it really is that. And the Trotskyites, yeah, they just, that became the incubator for this insane.
Well, what it did was it gave a guiding core principle to unify around, okay, and to capture elites. I mean, when we look at American foreign policy since the Second World War, there were distinct camps right now. That doesn't exist whatsoever. So there's been complete ideological capture right now when it comes to foreign policy, and it's messianic. And what I find really interesting, Matt and George, is that it doesn't really want to build anything. It wants to block, and it wants to subdue. And I think that, going back to the first part of our conversation, the global South, the global majority, they don't see how they're winners in that. That's not a win-win situation. The West has a win-lose approach to everything, and it does have its roots to some extent in Christianity, because if you don't convert, then you're not worthy, okay? And we see this now with postmodernist ideas, okay? It's taken a lot of the not the message, but the mechanism to enforce its will. And the problem is that there's so many centers of power right now that have the power to resist. That's what I see with Ukraine. They don't see the West as their value system is valuable, meaningful for them. And actually, they have the resources now to say no. That is that critical juncture that we have crossed into. They can say no.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, it's like they kept the worst elements of the fanatic rigidity. And they left everything good aside that used to be good about, that is good about Christianity, the loving, the idea that the truth is written on the hearts of all men. That's embedded in the
well, you could even go as far,
and that's all good. Agapic love, that's all forgotten, and just
or evangelical
rigidity.
We can update it a little bit more. The Enlightenment. I mean, the West is turning its back on the Enlightenment, and I would wager that there are many parts in the developing world that actually are attracted to some of those core ideas of the Enlightenment, and we see that being shut down in the West, where you can't even discuss science. I mean, it's all settled. No, science is never settled, ever. Okay, yeah. And say we see this very hegemonic approach to all problems, and a lot of the problems are created by the West because of this ideology. And I think that when the ideas of individual autonomy, freedom of speech, the rule of law, all of these things are under attack in the West for a higher cause. Don't ask me what it really is. And I think a lot of other people see the value in that. It doesn't mean you don't shed your cultural and religious values. I think a lot of the ideas of the Enlightenment dovetail very well with, conservative societies all around the world. It's not an either or choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, when you're in a situation of abundance and decadence, you have sort of the liberty to be very to be more relativistic about truth because it's like, you know, we've been enjoying and reaping the harvests of the sacrifices and creations made by generations past. I was born into a world that was already economically in a state of decline. We stopped building infrastructure in Canada like in a meaningful way back in the 70s. I was born in the 80s. And so that system was already atrophying. And so the orientation was towards the creation of bubbles, debt-based bubbles, speculation, deregulation. That was already happening. And so where do I get my abundance from? Well, it was done by all of those efforts made by people who worked and built the great things that I enjoy, the agro-industrial systems and other things. And so we turn into this lazy, useless services economy of people who were able to like just have ideas disassociated from practical reality. And so universities just became, theoretical zones of masturbation where there was no connection between the economic theories that you were teaching the students, and actual real world life that you live in. It's not like that in China and Russia. As far as I can see, that you have a much greater harmony or intensity towards seeing that there are real world applications of your economic ideas that have to be grounded in real concepts of value, that if you're going to invest, you have to create. You can't just consume without building. You have to do both at the same time. And I think this relativism thing is not something that Africa, most of the world who don't have abundance, they don't buy this relativism. It's all, nothing is true. There's no gender. They don't believe that. They're like, no, I'm going to have children that need food, that need a better life, that need water. We need functional electricity. We see other countries doing it and we want that. They see that. So obviously the best ideas of the Enlightenment that acknowledge the existence of truth are going to be receptive and things of postmodernism that are just there for a decadent, dumbed down society are not going to resonate with people who need to do things. And I hope that, as demands for doing things press themselves upon us, as we begin to have to realize that we need either to go for a depopulation agenda and eat bugs, or we change things up and restore old concepts of value we once had under John F. Kennedy, we're going to have to let go of certain postmodern concepts of science and art and other things too.
But how does one do that? I mean, you've got this whole globalists, the people, those guys who meet at Davos, and they are indeed wedded to the depopulation agenda, the whole green agenda, and essentially they want their publics to live a much less prosperous life. I mean, this has been the dream of these globalists for a long time, which is we need to tamp down our expectation. We need to basically live much more austere lives. I mean, this has been the themes since the 1970s, ever since the Club of Rome, and they say, no, we're going to give up on this, give up on that, give on that. So they this is their agenda, and then it's also the agenda of all the billionaires, the Bloombergs, the Gateses, and so on. So how do we challenge that?
While they get richer and richer.
Well, they themselves, exactly.
Right.
That's always the case. It doesn't apply to me. I mean, I will of course go on, flying my private jet, but it's you plebs who have to give up your washing machines.
They don't believe the things that they're telling us we have to take as high priorities. They don't believe that. They see, that's the thing. They've crafted these stories, these narratives to induce us into a state of a guilt complex, victimized, victim complex society, which is much more malleable. Like, it's understood that creative love, the flexibility of positive rational hope, is not very conducive in the poisoned soil of the soul, which is gripped by shame, guilt, victimization, all of these things. It's really useful for empire to have these as dominant cultural forces, keeping us in our little closed system boxes, afraid of ourselves, afraid of others, afraid of our neighbors, afraid of the future, ashamed of the past. It atomizes us wonderfully, and it makes us much more malleable.
I think that's what COVID was all about.
Oh yeah, total shock therapy, just to shake it up and reset it.
Yeah, but it's interesting. I mean, we're kind of drawing upon Western mythology, which is great with me. It's fine. It's kind of like, hate the sin, hate the sin, but don't hate the sinner. See, well, these people are sinners, okay? And what they practice is sin, but we have to be guilty about committing sin because they're aware of what the sins are, and they're somehow absolved because they are aware of our weaknesses and our needs for redemption.
Right, but that's the way you exert power. I mean, you exert power by telling the masses who would challenge your power that, hey, the fault is in you. You are wrong. There's Jeff Bezos, one of the richest men in the world, who gives money to Black Lives Matter to show, hey, I'm not a racist. You, however, my employees, you are racist. You in your everyday interactions, you're all racist. You're all sexist. You're all misogynist. You're all homophobes. And I have to educate you. I have to, make sure that the workplaces are, woman friendly, gay friendly, whatever. So I am not only much richer than you, but I am in the position of making you better people.
Well, you also look at Jeff Bezos. He's got I don't know how many tens of millions of dollars he paid for this villa on an island, which, according to all of the climate models that he's supporting, is going to be underwater in like 20 years, they say. But it's like you spent all of this money, and all of these guys are putting all of their resources into these like buying islands that are going to supposedly be underwater. They don't believe in that, and they don't believe in like. They say nice things about harmony and climate in Africa, but it's like at this U.S. African summit, and I was bringing up Cobalt Metals, which is founded by Bill Gates, funded by Bezos, funded by Branson, the New Space Movement people. This is an organization which says on their own website they intend to control all minerals of the world in like something like it's a pipe dream mission statement, but that's what they want. And part of it was intimidating Angola, especially Zambia and the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, to sign on to programs that would loosen their regulation on labor laws, child laws, environmental protection, all of these things. They want them to take it all down as if it's not low enough already. There's 40,000 child laborers working in cobalt mines in Congo. They want they want more kids in there. They want less environmental protection. I mean, they don't care about the so-called gospel that they're extolling upon the rest of us, that we're just supposed to live like, Greta Thunberg, poor girl. Like, that's what they want everybody, is to feel that sense of radicalized victimization and self-hate and loathing, because that's what they want as the new religion, masquerading as a new pseudoscience or a new pseudo-Christianity.
But it seems to me that this is a way to legitimize a new serfdom. Because yes, this is you poor children digging for cobalt, but you will find redemption, because you've been victimized, but we at Davos, we understand this, okay? And what it is try to inculcate into people that you have a certain station in life and it's your lot, okay? And the civilization that we're building, you will find redemption through our good works. Okay, look, FTX. Okay, the Sam Bankman-Fried type. It's that kind of mentality right there.
Yeah.
Now, and what I find really disturbing is that so many people buy into it is because the value system, and the West has no value system at all. I mean, Netflix, porn, fentanyl. I mean, everything is an escape from the reality that these people have created for us. Okay. Now, I have to admit, if I had a 300-foot yacht and a beautiful girlfriend and caviar, I probably would feel okay. I could live with my sins, if you know what I mean. Okay.
But the West, the West does have a value system. I mean, it doesn't follow its own value system, but it does have the value system because it's worked out what slogans, what buzzwords resonate with the public. I mean, it's a very, very skilled propaganda exercise. I mean, when Stoltenberg announces that, we are not a party to the conflict in Ukraine, and, we are selling deadly weapons, not selling, we're sending deadly weapons to Ukraine in order to bring peace that much closer. Those are skilled propaganda points. That they don't just come spontaneously. These people have learned from J.D. Bernays how you do propaganda, and then rules-based order. There are no rules and there's no order, but it sounds good. Oh yeah, rules-based order. I'm for that. No, they don't follow any of these things, but those are the sort of our values.
George is absolutely right. I saw an interview with Norman Finkelstein, Aaron Mate did with him a few days ago. And George and I are going to try to get him on our podcast. And Finkelstein brought up a point was really good. And I think it's applicable to our conversation here, is that the whole Obama phenomenon is that it basically they framed it. If you don't vote for him, you're a bad person. Okay. And it worked. It worked.
No, absolutely. Yeah, no, it did. Well, I mean, you've got this obvious mushification of the masses. And again, like, just like we had indulgences back in the day, you could pay for indulgences if you were a sinner, just give the church some money. They would give you a little piece, a get out of hell free card. Sort of the same thing with carbon credits offset. If you've got the money and you're a pollution sinner, you could pay some money into a green financial boondoggle and get out a green, hell free, and still stay on the side of virtue. So you got these things, but I mean, for the most part, I think looking at Davos, a lot of the live streams of like the Davos conference only had people views of like 6, 7, 8,000 for most of the live stream panels. And this is like supposedly the most important, we're told, most important world shaping event, every year. And people as a whole, number one, don't care to watch it. It doesn't represent them. Number two, they don't care about the people. So the people actually managing this stuff, you've got these different layers of mythology, some for the masses to try to just keep the masses in a drunken state of Netflix and porn addiction and self-mutilation as much as possible with horror movies and stuff, which is, again, horror movies are effectively a form of spiritual self-mutilation. You're just watching innocent people dying repeatedly, But so you just got to keep them as confused as possible on psychedelics and whatever else, just escaping. And meanwhile, the target sort of managers, first, second, third, fourth, fifth tier managers, you have to keep them as ideological as humanly possible and believing, certain drug myths that you create to give them a sense of purpose so that they themselves are instruments of a will that they don't fully understand.
Okay, so you're talking about Bolsheviks.
Basically modern, yeah, effectively. Yeah,
one example of that is that the other day, the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung in Germany published a poll of what Germans thought about Russia, Ukraine, and NATO. And according to this poll, only 45% of Germans are willing to help if a NATO ally, a member of NATO, is attacked. Only 45%. That's not even Ukraine. 45%. This Article 5, which is
we're all in this together.
That's it. One for all for one. 45%. Are willing to do that. Can you imagine just how fewer it is to do anything about Ukraine? And then, what's her name? Annalena Baerbock, the German foreign minister, I don't care what German people think. I will go on doing what I need to do for Ukraine.
George, that's not the first time they've done this poll. They've done it in the past. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but I remember that having. So essentially the same numbers, and they did it with Spain, with Italy and other countries, and it was way less than 50%. Now, the reason why I interrupted you is that now we have the conflict in Ukraine and it's still 45%. So something very real. Before it was theoretical. And now it's a very real possibility, and it still doesn't move the needle. That should tell us a lot.
Yeah, good point. No, absolutely. And the fact that you've got Biden has said we have to take the pain in order to save the Ukrainians. Now, they're admitting all of a sudden that despite all of this shame and guilt, and we have to just, toughen up, look at the poor Ukrainians, they're admitting that they're the ones who consciously self-sabotaged the Minsk II agreements. I mean, people from Bojo and Merkel, and I mean, it's now common knowledge. It's almost like something you celebrate yourself. And even Zelensky himself has said we never intended to honor it. And that was the whole reason why we demonized Russia to begin with, is because.
But Matt,
But again, you have this. Yeah, but the point here is that there's Johnson. He said, it's all on record. Johnson goes to Kiev and tells him, don't sign any agreement with Putin, because even if you agree with Putin, we're not going to accept that agreement. And then we have Naftali Bennett saying the same thing. Johnson was the one who basically pushed to squash it. And how do the media report it? You can't negotiate with Putin. Putin refuses. We want peace, but it's Putin who rejects any possible agreement. I mean, it's on the record, and the media was
George,
the opposite.
But that's the crux of the problem, gentlemen, is that the three of us and our viewers, they are informed. They have made an effort to understand the origins of this conflict, and it didn't start in February of last year. It goes much further back. But if we talked about Seymour Hersh's book, okay, he can lay out as much detail as he wants, but if the mainstream media and politicians don't, I think Mike Lee is the only politician that made any kind of meaningful comment about it. But Mintz, we're obviously right. How many people in the public even know what we're talking about? When you look at reportage in the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, CNN, MSNBC, how often do they bring that up? They don't even know what it is. And that's why
a concerning thing.
I feel like, we're just howling in the wind sometimes, because it's not the issue of freedom of speech. It's the freedom of reach. And that's the problem. The reach is very, very limited to a small group of people like ourselves. And that is the biggest dilemma that we have. If we can't even make the case.
I listen to NPR and stupid mainstream radio when I'm stuck in traffic, just to hear what the garbage is that the zeitgeist is being shaped by. And I mean, I listened to probably too much of this. Anyway, if you were just a regular normie, just in a passive, receptive consumer relationship with information coming at you from these controlled zones, you would believe that Putin is the cause of global warming. And they have experts that they trot out to make the case somehow scientifically that the war in Ukraine is driving climate change now, all because of Putin, or that Bashar al-Assad is at fault, is the reason why there was an earthquake in Syria and all his death. That it's actually his fault. And like, people, this is actually what people can't accept being passive consumers of information. Now they will for a while still. Unfortunately, the damage is quite deep. But the beauty of this current situation in world history is that these oligarchs are masters of perception. Admittedly, perception management, 5 stars. Like, they're great. Good job. Well done. Reality, on the other hand, not so good at. Their ivory tower. It's an ivory tower system of controls. It all looks good on paper until you actually go into practice, and then things blow up in your face, and then the Western Roman Empire collapses. Or the oligarchy didn't benefit with all of the effort and grand designs of how clean the New World Order was going to look under a fascist complex, under the Count Kunova Kalergi and his Pan-Europa, which had Hjalmar Schacht and the Mussolini networks and American fascists from the CFR. All of them were like working with this idea of Pan-Europa. That's at the heart of today's European Union, by the way. And it looked all good on paper until they actually started doing it with the League of Nations. And then all of a sudden, things started breaking. It didn't work that way. And Hitler all of a sudden didn't behave the way that he was expected to. And things started just falling apart. And the oligarchs who were putting all of this effort and decades of work into doing it, all of a sudden had Frankenstein monsters that didn't really want to go along with the same plan, wanted to do their own thing. And it wasn't beneficial for the oligarchy has spent years, decades trying to undo or do it right this time, play a longer game with a bit more patience since the 40s. And it's again not working. It looked good in the 90s. Now it's not. People, surprise, surprise, don't democratically want to just commit seppuku on behalf of our gods, our new 21st century gods that demand sacrifice. People don't want to do that. What do we do? It's like, well, maybe change.
Well, I mean, we got to get a good indication of that in 2016 with the election of Trump. Okay, I mean, you can feel whatever you want about the guy. It's fine with me. But I mean, and I've discussed this with George. I mean, his campaign slogan at the end of the day was, "What do you have to lose?" And I think that's where a lot of people are. What do you have to lose?
Right.
Because everything else is gone.
All right. Well, unfortunately, our time is up. That was a very good discussion, great discussion. You know, time just whizzes by. So thank you so much, Matt, for joining us. We're going to have you back very soon because, you know, that wasn't enough. I mean, we only touched the surface. So thank you.
I was thinking, well, we could maybe do if we do this in the future, since the whole UFO psyop thing is really amplifying. I wrote an article on Lawrence Rockefeller, MK Ultra, psychedelics, and the UFO cult. And there's like 4 stupid things that have all been like put forth that the U.S. has like dealt with, these UFO objects that they've shot down one of them. Anyway, all of this is part of the crafting of new myths, new narratives, the great narratives for the 21st century to replace the old, myths of Christianity and things that are not.
Well, let's do that next time. All right?
Okay.
All right. Thanks very much, Matt. We'll see you very soon.